Let me just go back here to the town regulations of 1759. As I said, there was no dancing matches, taverning, or beer tappings. And getting back to prohibition, what I was talking about a minute ago, here's some newspaper articles. During the week of January 23rd, 1920, it was announced that Lititz had gone dry and many local bars took down their beer signs. But wait, there's more. Ironically, exactly 90 years later to the week, news that the Bull's Head Pub in Lititz will open makes front page news. And 4 years later, Lititz holds its very first beer fest on a Sunday of all days. We also can't talk about early taverns without talking about the historic Newport Road, which was a 63-mile stretch from nearby Mount Hope in Lebanon County to Newport, Delaware. Teams traveled via horse or Conestoga wagon, and Newport, Delaware was a key seaport where goods arrived or were shipped to Boston, Philadelphia, or New York. In this picture here on the right is the sign where the Newport Road begins there in Lebanon County. Horses traveled single file at many points. It was a rough road. It was a bumpy road. It wasn't paved like it is today. Obviously, there were no automobiles. And along the way, taverns were built. And many times, as we're going to see in the program, they were constructed at crossroads to accommodate travelers. So let's jump into it. This is our very first tavern we're going to talk about. This is Molly Plaster's Tavern, 545 West Newport Road. It is now a private home. It was built about circa 1818. And as I said just a second ago about being built at a crossroads, this is where Newport, Speedwell Forge, Brubaker Valley, and Elm Roads all meet. Okay, and this particular tavern is in the hamlet of Elm, okay, just northwest of downtown Lititz. And the arrow there points to where the inn was. It was also known as Penn Tavern or Beidler's Tavern. It was a headquarters for mountaineers and meeting place for iron workers traveling to and from the Cornwall area of Lebanon County. And here on the bottom right is part of the indenture of Molly Plaster's. It's from an 1854 property deed. In 1862, this property boasted 56 acres containing a smokehouse, a stable, an ice house, and a carriage house. And this view here is from the 1864 Lancaster County Atlas. Here's a list of some of the former owners of Molly Plaster's. And finishing up with this one, as I said, it is now a private home, and it's been in the same family for many decades. All right, well, again, we couldn't talk about, Newport Road. We couldn't talk about early taverns without talking about Jacob Huber's Tavern, which is located at 304 East Newport Road. It was built about 1730. Many of you are most likely familiar with this home, and maybe you even toured it at one time or another. Okay, Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf, who founded the town of Lititz, he preached here in 1742 to German farmers. And this plaque here that's on the right side is affixed to the back end of the home, which faces north. And it just so happens that neighbor John George Klein missed the speech that Zinzendorf gave, but he eventually did hear him speak in Lancaster at the Lancaster County Courthouse, and was so moved by Zinzendorf's preachings that Klein decided to donate 500 acres of his own farmland to begin what we now know as Lititz. And many feel that the start of Lititz is actually at Jacob Huber's Tavern. You can make a really good case for that. Some interesting features of the structure: it has a vaulted arch root cellar, which was built first. And the way they did this was workers actually shaped the arch with dirt fill, laid the brick arch over the dirt, then dug out the cellar again, leaving the arch freestanding. So pretty neat. Let me just move this out of the way. just so you can see that. On April 26, 1787, Jacob Huber sold the property to Joseph Ginrich. The Erb family owned the property next from about 1802 to about 1844. And then later, Christian Snyder would purchase the tavern in 1844. By 1930, it was owned by the Hershey family. And then in 1995, as you see as a photo here from the right, part of the land was sold and developed into housing. Newport Road was also rerouted. And then now the road runs in front of the property where the pathway is there on the right side of the screen. Okay, it used to run in back of the property, the little road you see there to the left. Well, of course, as we know now, the front of the tavern faces Newport Road. For many years, it was also a successful bed and breakfast. And now just recently, it's been transferred back to the Hershey family. Okay, next we have the Rome Hotel, which once stood at the corner of East Main and Lititz Run roads. It was built about 1730. It was located outside of Lititz boundaries, so it was free from Moravian town regulations, okay? In 1864, it was known as Bruiser's Hotel. Like so many businesses, including taverns, these businesses went into many, many different hands over the years. This is funny. One day in the 1880s, a red-haired baboon was left at the hotel. And when its keeper never came back, the owner decided to keep it for a pet. And in case you didn't know, that's what a red-haired baboon looks like. Okay, next owner was H.L. Usner, who took it over in April 1889. On his first night, things got a little crazy, as you can see here by the quote from the Lititz record. It says, "Merriment ran supreme and all seemed to enjoy themselves hugely, save a few who loaded more than they should and became noisy and quarrelsome, resulting in bruised faces." Okay, and here's a list of some of the past owners. Basically what I said a minute or so ago about how, these tavern owners would come and go. Some had it for decades, some had it for only a year or two. Many of these hotels were also raided, as you can see, during Prohibition. Here's some local newspaper articles, and I'm not going to read every single word on these articles, but I think if you take a minute, you get the gist. One happened in 1925 and another one happened in 1932 at this particular location. So it wasn't uncommon for these taverns to be raided for bootlegging or for gambling or for fistfights. They were pretty rough places back then. In 1942, the building was converted to apartments, and this picture was taken on the eastern side of the downtown area. And if this doesn't look familiar to you, maybe you're new to town, that's okay, because unfortunately it was torn down. The hotel was in 2008, and now there's a auto dealership there. They also sell trucks. Right near, if you remember where a Chimney Corner restaurant was, it was basically at that intersection. Okay, here's another familiar one to many. This is called the Zum Anker Inn, which resides at 125 East Main Street. It dates back all the way to 1762. And this is an early drawing by former Lititz Historical Foundation president Hiram Eberly. Now you have to remember too, this would have been controlled by the Moravians back then. And in 1762, as it says here on the screen, on the 2nd February, Brother Horn received his license from the court for his inn, and thereafter began operation of the inn. Now, back then, women were referred to as sisters, and men were referred to as brothers. Okay, so Brother Horn, Sister Smith, on and on and on. And again, everything was controlled by the Moravians. Here's a Moravian diary entry from 1764. On the 25th of May, brother and sister Horn moved out of the stone George Klein house, where they have had an inn temporarily, into the newly built Anchor Inn out on the highway. Now, I'm going to unpack this a little bit, because for the first 2 years of this hotel, this existence, it was not located where it is now. Everyone knows what's now Lititz Springs Inn is now the corner of Main and Broad. But for the first 2 years, it was located where the Pilger House is on Main Street, further east. Okay, Pilger House is an old building. It's now condos and apartments. It was beautifully restored back in 2007. So for 2 short years, this Zum Anker was at the Pilger House. And again, as the screen says, in 1764, it was moved to the corner of Main and Broad Street. During the early days, the Moravians, as I said, owned the property, but they did allow others to rent the establishment, as this newspaper clipping says here, from 1826. Back then, it was also known as the Lititz Tavern. Now, look at the newspaper clipping here at the top where it says Lititz. Notice how it says, how it's spelled L-I-T-I-Z. Well, of course, we spell the town L-I-T-I-T-Z today, but that's the way the town was spelled all the way up until 1880. And the reason they added the second T is because the U.S. Post Office wanted to make the word sound more like it's spelled, okay? So that's a little fun fact for you. In 1803, a 2-story brick addition was added to the west. In 1848, a 3rd story was added, and the name was changed to Lititz Springs Hotel. Now, take a look at the picture here on the left. It's starting to take shape. It's starting to look like what we know it as today. You still have carriages there. If you look closely, there's a horse and carriage. It's a dirt road, not paved roads yet. February 1854, the Moravian Society decides to sell the hotel to Samuel Lichtenthauer for $5,000. Here's a beautiful lithograph on the left of what the Springs Hotel would have looked like around that time. Now, 1854 was a pretty pivotal time. 1 year later, the town would open up in 1855 to non-Moravians. And whether the Moravian elders knew that at the time, maybe they had some foresight, but I don't think it's a coincidence that in February in 1854, they decide to relinquish the hotel to an outsider. And about 1 year later, the town opens up to non-Moravians. And here's a newspaper clipping from that same year talking about the sale of the Lititz Hotel. Here's a list of previous owners. Okay, Frederick Zitzman owned it from 1825 to 1827. For a short time, those 2 years, it was known as the Lititz Public House, which I think is ironic because to the left side of the hotel now is, of course, the Bull's Head Public House. Frederick Zitzman was also the 2nd postmaster of Lititz between 1830 and 1849. And below him are subsequent owners. And by the way, this picture that you're seeing on the right with the sleigh and the horses and the kids, these were members of Elizabethtown Glee Club that decided to visit the hotel during a winter day. And I understand they enjoyed a meal of chicken and waffles. All right. Then in 1886, it sold to none other than Julius Sturgis. And here's the deed to prove it. So yes, the gentleman who commercialized pretzel baking in America, as we all know who Julius Sturgis is, I'm sure, for a short time, he actually owned the Lititz Springs Hotel. And it just goes to show you, okay, if I can get the slide to work, that beer and pretzels have always gone together well. All right, let me move this to the bottom corner. There we go. In fact, in 1886, there were two quote unquote Sturgis hotels. Of course, we know that the Lititz Springs Hotel was owned by Sturgis. I just talked about that. That's on the ad here on the bottom. And on the top, there was a hotel right down the road that we'll talk about a little bit later, owned by Edwin Sturgis. By the way, these guys were cousins. Okay, in 1913, owner James Bropes renovated, added wing to the east, enlarged the lobby, adds triple windows to the front, and adds a French roof. Then something interesting happened in 1930. Unfortunately, the hotel was abandoned. And the picture on the left is about what it looked like around that time. This is such an ominous photo. You don't even see any cars whatsoever on the street, okay? But townspeople got together. They decided to sell stocks, and they started to sort of rejuvenate the hotel. They began a capital campaign to raise money. Here's a stock certificate on the right, and it was all to raise money to revitalize the hotel and open it back up. It was successful, and it opened back up as the General Sutter in 1930, December of 1930. And here's a front page headline from the Lititz Record talking about the opening of the new hotel. Now, in April of 1967, the future of this tavern was threatened yet again, this time by a gas station which was proposed to be built on site. However, the community rallied, a petition was signed by countless citizens, and the idea was thankfully abandoned. And here's a modern picture of the General Sutter Hotel, now known as the Lititz Springs Inn. All right, moving on. Let's move to Rossville, where we're going to talk about the White Swan Hotel. It's located at 1264 East Newport Road. It was built in 1790, and it's still operating today. It was also the first structure built in that town at the time. Excuse me, at the time, Rossville was known as Rabbit Hill. And Mr. Roth purchased 80 acres and built the tavern on part of that track on Rabbit Hill. Once again, you see, if you've been to the White Swan, you know it's constructed at an intersection. In 1845, a post office was established and the town was renamed Rossville. So that the town name came along in 1845. In 1865, 20 years later, the tavern was known as Klaus's Rabbit Hill Tavern. From 1885 to 1917, believe it or not, a half-mile racetrack was located in the rear of the property. And this is a picture of the racetrack here on the right. This isn't from another place. This is an actual photo, believe it or not, of the racetrack that existed at one time behind the White Swan Hotel. Races typically took place during what was called Whit Monday, which was a very popular race day of the month in June. In 1909, Barton and McKeefer renamed it the Swan Hotel. And then in 1940, it was renamed the White Swan by owners Obie and Fannie Miller. So believe it or not, it wasn't officially named the White Swan like we know it today until 1940. Here's a list of some former owners, okay? Notice here the second up from the bottom, Aaron Wesley in 1905. By that time, the original brick was covered by plaster, which it still is today. It's still covered by plaster. In 1945, Albert and Anna Weber bought it and replaced the plaster with white stucco. Anna operates it until her death around 1988. Then in 1989, the Conrad family purchases it. Then Gene Gensmer comes along and buys it in 1993. Okay, so that's a little bit about the White Swan Hotel. Now let's move north. Okay, we're going to go to Elizabeth Township, and we're going to learn about the Brickerville Hotel, located at 2 East Division Highway, excuse me, 2 East 28th Division Highway, built about 1793 by John Bricker. In the 1850s, it was known as Bentz's Hotel when it was owned by a gentleman named George Bentz. In 1830, a post office would open inside the hotel, inside this tavern. Okay, and here's a postmark, a very rare postmark from 1907 that actually has, you could see the stamp and the postcard was actually canceled at the Brickerville post office, which again was located inside the Brickerville Hotel at one time. Here's a list of several past owners of the Brickerville Hotel. Here's a cool view inside around the 1920s. Around that time, a gentleman named Wayne Weidman would convert it to a gas station and general store. So it was partially a tavern on one side, partially a gas station and general store on the other side. Now, you might recognize this building today. Yes, this is the Brickerville Family Restaurant, okay? Stepping back a little bit, Bill and Peggy Lawton would purchase the restaurant in 1972. So by then, it long ceased to be a tavern. It long ceased to be a hotel. And ever since 2009, the Agatis family has operated, again, as I just said, the Brickerville Family Restaurant right inside that building. Lots of history inside there. All right, let's move on. We're now back just south of downtown. We're at the Kissel Hill Hotel, which unfortunately, this building no longer exists, but one time it was located at One Trolley Road, and it was built about 1780. Now, when the siding was removed before demolition, the dates on the logs ranged from about 1780 to 1789. The walls were also composed of foot-thick logs laid between mud made of horsehair and clay. Beautiful building. Unfortunately, it had to get demolished. In 1864, it was known as the New Haven Hotel. Okay, now that area, also called Kissel Hill, as I just said, early on during the 1800s was often referred to as New Haven. That's why it was called the New Haven Hotel. Okay, and as you can see in the second bullet point there, a post office inside caused the name change. There's a really neat old sign there on the right-hand side of the Kissel Hill Inn. And this is kind of an interesting newspaper clipping I found from 1911. If you could go inside there, visit the hotel, and you could see imported red bats. I'm not sure that you wanted to, but you had the choice to do it if you wanted to. And by the way, that's what an imported red bat looks like. So definitely cringeworthy. Here's a list of some past owners, all the way up until the 1930s. By 1940, the structure was no longer a hotel, but auctions were still being held there. Unfortunately, the building was demolished in 1953, so a curve in 501 could be straightened. The floorboards luckily were saved and repurposed in a home in Ephrata. The bar was also saved and now in a private home in Lititz. And if you're standing at the Burger King restaurant in Lititz and you're looking straight across, you're going to see the PNC Bank to your left. And right around where the arrow is pointing there by the curb, by the road, is more or less where the Kissel Hill Hotel once stood. Okay, let's move on to the Warwick House, now called the Toy Soldier. It's located at 104 North Broad Street and built about 1809. Now, it's important to know that outside of the Lititz boundaries was a town called Warwick. It was on the other side of the railroad tracks. And the joke was, if you were from the town of Warwick, you were from the wrong side of the tracks. Okay. But the Warwick House was in competition with what was then the Lititz Springs Inn or the General Sutter. They offered cheaper rates than the Springs Hotel and the Sturgis Hotel, which were both downtown, smack dab downtown. In 1814, 1.5-story addition was added to the north of the Warwick House. In 1860s, the name was changed to Sands Hotel in honor of owner Thomas Sands. It was renamed again in the late 1860s to the Kemper House. And that was because of the owner, Levi Kemper. And here on the bottom left of your screen is an old trade card for the Kemper House. Here's a beautiful postcard of the Warwick House. Definitely had some changes over the years. Later on, H.H. Snavely changes the name back to the Warwick House around 1890, and it was known for its many outdoor auctions. Look at the picture here on the right. Okay, you can kind of get a sense of where this was taken across the street on North Broad. The Warwick House is the building in the background there on the right-hand side. But look at all that, just easily a couple hundred people there at an auction there. Here's a list of owners between 1850 and 1900. There were 8 different owners over a 50-year period stretch that owned the Warwick House. John Badorf would purchase it in 1901. And a lot of these hotels, not just the Warwick House, but they were places where you could vote. They had political rallies. They had political meetings. They had vaudeville shows. They had, movies, all kinds of things, anything to bring people in. In January 1920, unfortunately, the Warwick House died during Prohibition and served as a storage warehouse. So unfortunately, it was closed. It's not wasn't in continuous use since 1809. It was shuttered during Prohibition. Harold Haldeman owned it between 1948 and 1962. His son Dubs Haldeman owned it between 62 and 68. Later on, Ray and Judy Wells purchased it in 1972. During that time, the building was referred to as the Wells Warwick House. And since 1992, it's been owned by the current owner, and it's been known as the Toy Soldier Pub. Moving on, this is a really interesting tavern that I found in my research. It's located, or I should say it was once located at 1475 East Newport Road. It was built about 1820. It was known as the Seminole Inn. Now, you're not going to find the word Seminole on any modern map of Lancaster County. I guarantee it. Okay? It was a very small hamlet just west of Rossville, right before you enter Brownstown, right on the edge of Warwick Township. The earliest known owner was John Geyer in 1820, and it was built of chestnut logs. It was later owned by his son, Colonel George Geyer, by 1859, and the bathroom was actually carved out of the corner of the upstairs room in the corner. And here's an 1864 atlas view of where the Seminole Inn was. As you can see, Colonel George Geyer is the name on the atlas. And this is one of the very few references in any Lancaster County map that I've ever seen that you can actually find the hamlet of Seminole named on a map. And again, that's in the 1864 Lancaster County Atlas. It didn't last very long, and I'm just going to go back one slide. More or less, that's what the home looks like now. It is a private home. But when did the business cease? We're not quite sure. As you can see on this 1875 view of the Atlas, it doesn't say Seminole Inn. It still says Colonel George Geyer, but there's no indication that a business is there anymore. So maybe between 1865 and 74, something like that. That's just a rough guess. More research will have to be done. All right, moving into the rough and tough Lexington Hotel. Located at 6 Loop Road, it's now a private home. It was built about 1830. In 1864, it was known as the Lexington Inn and owned by Gabriel Schlott and his wife. It was also known as the Lexington Tavern around the time of the Civil War. And here's an 1864 atlas view of where the inn was. It's in the small hamlet of Lexington, which again is very hard to find on any modern map, okay? It's a small village, sort of between Lititz and Bernerville, if you're familiar with those areas. I'm going to start with the picture here on the right. This is the only known early photograph of the Lexington Hotel. And I know it's not the best picture, but it's the only one I've ever seen. And that's after me trying to bring out the colors and the brightness. It's a really bad photo. I played around in Photoshop and tried to bring out the people and tried to bring out some of the structure. But that's the only known early photograph of the Lexington Hotel. In 1877, the original structure was torn down, but brand new building was erected in its place. This picture on the right is probably the rebuild, I would guess. The Lexington Hotel, as I said, was a rough and tumble place. It was famous for bootlegging, gambling, and barroom balls. Here's a list of owners, okay? On and on and on. Again, sometimes they owned it for 20, 30 years. Sometimes they owned it for 1 year. Sometimes they owned it for 2 years. Here's an owner. If you look at the top right of your screen, 1892 D.H. Snyder. But 1 year later, John Steely would own it. Only 2 years later, a gentleman named Dan Furlow would own it. So it wasn't uncommon for these things to change hands pretty quickly. Here's more owners of the Lexington Hotel. This is just some of the many, many newspaper articles I found on the Lexington Hotel when it was raided for, again, bootlegging, for fights, for someone pulling a pistol on someone, you name it. I mean, it was a rough place. Out of all the taverns that we're talking about tonight, the Lexington Hotel was by far the most dangerous. Eventually, in the 1960s, it was converted to apartments. And here's an old match pack here on the right-hand side. Here's an old ad in the center of your screen from the 1940s. And if you see here in the middle of that ad, the CWS Rangers, they were a popular music group, apparently, barn and city dancing every Saturday night. So they also had live music there at the hotel. And take a look at this old sign here on the left. This sold at auction several years ago for thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's pretty well accepted that this was one of the original Lexington Hotel signs. This would have been partial neon that hung outside the Lexington Hotel. I don't know exactly when, probably in the 30s or 40s, I would guess, but I don't know for sure. All right, moving on to the Bernerville Hotel, about a mile down from the Lexington Hotel. The Bernerville Hotel is located on the corner of Pine Hill and Bernerville Roads and was built in 1861. Originally, it was known as the Whitehall Tavern, and Whitehall was the original town name of Bernerville. The town was renamed, however, in 1861 when the post office opened. And by the way, the town was named after a gentleman named Peter Brunner, who was, he was an ironmaster of the time. Here's an old newspaper clipping talking about the new post office that's been established at Whitehall. See how it says Warwick Township, to be called Berners-ville. So this newspaper is pretty neat because it talks about, okay, it's been established, the post office has been established at Whitehall, Warwick Township, this county, but the town is going to be called Berners-ville. And John Whistler was the first postmaster. Here's an old original picture of the Bernerville Hotel sign. And I'd say this is probably easily from the early 1900s. In 1920, while Roy Hoffer owned the business, it was shut down because of prohibition, of course. And they renamed the business to Bernerville Restaurant. And there's a really cool picture there. You can kind of see if you look in the center, it says Bernerville Restaurant. It doesn't say Bernerville Hotel. It doesn't say Bernerville Tavern. It says Bernerville Restaurant. That's trying to tell people, basically federal agents, that, hey, we're not serving beer here. They probably were, but at least it was a good front. Here's a list of some owners through the years. Okay, again, sometimes they had it for 1 or 2 years. Sometimes they had it for 2 years. Sometimes they had it for 3 years. As I said earlier in the program, these taverns and hotels were places not just to put up your horse, not just to sleep for the night, not just to have a good meal, but also a place where taxes could be paid, votes could be cast, and political gatherings took place. And yes, this is a picture of the Bernerville Hotel here on the right. This is the crossroads of Bernerville. Okay, this is looking east. The Bernerville Hotel is on the left side. They were stables next door to the west. Around the time, you can see the stable building there behind the hotel. And the operation is still going strong today. Not the stables, obviously, but the hotel itself. Anyone notice there in the center of the picture, the American flag flowing there? It was hung up about 20 feet or so. It's hanging there at the crossroads. All right, we're going to move back to Rossville now, and we're going to talk about the Keystone House. This building still stands. It's now a private residence, and it's located at 2034 Rossville Road at the intersection of Route 772. It was built around the time of the Civil War, around the 1860s. As I said, it hosted social functions, balls. The Keystone House also had fairs, carnivals, vaudeville acts, and here's an old ad for the Grand Social Ball taking place 1898 at the Keystone House, also known as Keystone Hall in Rossville. Now, we were talking about the Lexington Hotel and some of the barroom fights that happened. Well, the Keystone House was also no exception. Here's a Rossville diary entry from 1905, which stated, quote, watched fighting going on until 12:30 at Ritu's. At the time, the Keystone Hotel, which is pictured here on the left of your screen, was owned by a gentleman with the last name of Ritu. Okay, here's a picture here on the right-hand side of the Keystone House. If you look closely, you can see the sign there hanging up, and list of some of the owners on the left through the years. In 1886, tramps broke in and stole coats, whiskey, cigars, and beer from the Keystone House. They were later captured. And here's a newspaper article basically summarizing what I just talked about. I'm not going to read it word for word, but that wasn't uncommon for tramps and homeless people to come in and steal stuff. And it's just the way it was back then. All right, now let's move into the Pine Hill Inn. Now, you might be familiar with Pine Hill Road, but again, Pine Hill is a small hamlet that still exists today, but to find it on any modern map is just not going to happen. But yes, Pine Hill did have its own tavern at one time. It was built in the late 1860s, early 1870s, something like that. It was also known as the Pine Hill Hotel during the 1870s. And a gentleman named Adam Sharp sold it in 1884 when it was known as the Pine Hill Hotel. And if you look in the center of the picture there, you can see it says Pine Hill Inn, Adam Sharp. This building still exists today. It is a private home. They did not allow me to take a picture of it, even from the road. So unfortunately, I don't have a modern view of the building. But you know, please do not trespass. But if you want to drive past it, the address is right there at the top of your screen. Like so many other taverns, several public sales took place here over the years. I mentioned that earlier. Pine Hill Inn was no exception. At the time, it was owned by a gentleman named Joseph Flory. At the time, they sold different things there: guns, a pistol, office furniture, household goods, farming utensils, on and on and on. And this was from 1886, as the screen says. All right, moving back to downtown Lititz, let's take a visit to the Hotel Sturgis. I mentioned this place earlier. It's now located at 43 East Main Street, built after the Civil War in 1867. Edwin Sturgis, who was a Civil War veteran, opened the hotel. And a gentleman named Peter Ringer came along and remodeled and expanded it, also added a third story in 1895. Some of you still might be scratching your head as to where this building is. Well, it'll all come to light here in a second. Okay, but first, I want to talk about a gentleman named George Hoyt, who made a speech at the Hotel Sturgis in downtown Lititz in 1878. He was a famous character of the time, and he was also a member of the Abolitionist Party, and he later became the 6th Attorney General of Kansas. Here's some former owners of the Hotel Sturgis. They serve choice liquors, wines, and cigars, lager beer, and all other refreshments at all times. So you know what they say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, I guess. This is from an ad from 1887. George Coffroth buys it from Augustus Ank in 1889. By that time, it boasted 14 rooms, a telephone, and a stable to accommodate 30 horses in the back. It ceased hotel operations in 1922. Why? Surprise, surprise, it couldn't survive after Prohibition. Now, this is the current building on the right. Now, I say current, it doesn't quite look like this because in 1934, a gentleman came along and converted part of it to what was known as the Lititz Community Movie Theater. The theater was there right on Main Street. You can see the marquee there on the right of your screen from 35 until 64, so 29 years. Eventually, the top floors were converted from rooms to full-blown apartments in the early 1970s. In 1995, fire ripped through the building, nearly destroying it. Luckily, though, part of the structure was saved and it was rebuilt. Here's a modern view from 2020. Now, there's no question, you most likely know where this building is. Slate Cafe is on the left. What's called the Purple Robin Reserve is on the right, where the movie theater was. And I tell everyone, whenever we give walking tours of downtown Lititz, I always tell people to look up. You never know what you might see. And the original letters there, where it says on the right of your screen, Hotel Sturgis, if you look up, you will see it still has the original lettering there today from when it was a thriving hotel. Moving on, let's go to Millport, which is 1 Becker Road, Lititz. Where is Millport? Millport is between Lititz and Rossville, just east of the downtown. Okay, this is now a private residence. It was built in the 1860s. Here's an old match pack from the bar there on the right-hand side. Good beer and good eats. Gypsies came and were situated near the hotel in 1912. Gypsies ended up stealing a horse from the Warwick House, which we learned about, and hid out near the Millport Hotel. So they went from one hotel to another to try to make their escape. Here's a picture of the hotel on the right-hand side. A Democratic Party was held here in October 1912, where a Wilson Marshall flag was raised. Here's a list of former owners on the left hand of your screen. And again, these hotels were very busy places. They had shooting matches, which probably wouldn't be politically correct to put something like that in the newspaper today. 12-gauge guns only. Guns will be furnished. So yeah, chalk that up to something you probably won't see in the newspaper today, okay? In 1941, the owner was busted for an illegal poker machine, just one of the many other taverns and hotels where dubious things went on. In this case, he had 2 illegal poker machines, and they were seized. You can see here, if you look towards the bottom of this article too, it says, police testified they seized a poker machine at the Millport Hotel and 2 pinball machines and a slot machine at the White Swan Hotel. Remember the White Swan in Rossville? As I said earlier, now the Millport Hotel is a private residence. Moving on, Millway Hotel. Millway is just about when you get to Ephrata, but it's on the Warwick Township border. It's a little bit past Rossville. Anyway, the Millway Hotel, was located at 271 East Meadow Valley Road and was built about 1885. Here's an 1899 Atlas view of the Millway Hotel. Unfortunately, in 1889, there was a stabbing at the hotel. As the newspaper stated, during an altercation, a George Smith stabbed Abraham Cockle and Lemuel Kemper each 5 times and sliced 4 fingers of another man's hand. Again, I can't stress enough, these were rough places. Here's a list of former owners of the Millway Hotel. Here's an old ad for the Millway Hotel, otherwise known as Hotel Millway, to the commercial men and automobile tourists while traveling through Millway. In April 1920, owner Aaron Nock opens a clothing store in the former hotel building. And as I said, the Millway Hotel is now a private residence. Now, what spelled the end of these taverns, not just in Lititz area, not just in Lancaster County, but all around the country? Well, several things. More locally, there is no longer a port in Newport. Remember how we started out? We talked about the Jacob Huber Hotel, how that was along the Newport Road. Okay. Well, again, there's no longer a port in Newport. Americans adopted the automobile in the late 1800s. They came into vogue in the early 1900s. They could travel faster, longer, safer, cleaner. They didn't have to rely on horses. The stables were demolished, okay? Also, the biggest one, as I mentioned throughout the program, number 3 here, Prohibition. For those 13 years, Prohibition did a lot of damage in many, many different ways, okay? And that was probably the number 1 thing that knocked out a lot of these early taverns. Some of them bounced back, okay? Not quite being the same what they were. Some never bounced back at all. And that's the program, everyone. I want to thank you so much. Believe it or not, we just spent just about an hour going through the taverns of the Lititz area. And now I'm going to minimize my screen. And now I want to hear from you. I want to know if anybody has any questions, if anything anyone wants to hear about, please let me know.
Hi, Corey. I actually live in the Keystone.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Do you have any other information? I've seen those few photos before, but I have 3 front doors because I live on the coast side, and I've always been very curious how it was laid out.
I don't, what I have, you saw on the program, so I don't exactly have any more information. I can see if I can't find anything else, but that's basically all I had. I mean, have you ever seen any other pictures or anything else? I mean, I'd love to incorporate it in this program in the future.
No, I haven't. I had just seen the one that says Keystone Hotel in the bottom left-hand corner, and then the one you posted actually as the cover for this presentation.
Yes. Okay.
So it's if you wanted to come in, you certainly could. We could talk about it. my stairs are extremely steep, so we've always been curious about like certain, people that worked here, if maybe that was their access, things like that. So it's just really interesting inside of here, the way it's broken up.
Yeah, and it seems to me, now obviously I've never been the inside and I'm sure it's been renovated, but it seems to me that very little has been done on the outside. What I mean is cosmetically what it looked like 150 years ago versus today. Maybe you can speak to that better.
Just that I've been here 10 years and nothing's been done since I've been here except a new porch floor. The windows seem to be all original in the front part. They were replaced in the back wooden part. I mean, my ceilings are like 10 feet tall and the walls are, a foot thick or so. So it's definitely reminiscent, if not pretty much the same, I would imagine.
Okay. Yeah.
Corey,
yes.
Could you go back to the Keystone Hotel?
Sure. Give me a second here. Let me get the program up and then I'll have to reshare my screen, which I can happily do. I just got to find where. Give me a second here. All right, there you go.
Yeah, so looking at this, the two windows on the right side, that's one apartment, like a duplex. And then the two on the left, and then all 5 of those windows on the left brick part, that's all one unit.
Right. Okay.
The attic access is from the right-hand side and the basement access is from the left-hand side.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, how many apartments are in there?
4 altogether. So the older, well, I'd imagine older, but at least the brick portion is 2 units side by side, and then the back is top and bottom.
Okay.
2 bedrooms in the main house and then 2 on the upper, and it's almost like efficiency level, the bottom rear.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, it's very small, just one big room, and then somebody probably put up a wall in the middle to make a bedroom, bathroom.
Okay. Thanks for the information. I hope you learned something.
Sure. Yeah, it's always interesting to find out. I love history stuff, so living here has been kind of fun.
Yeah, great.
If you ever want to come in, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'd love to. Is there any anything inside that would indicate that a tavern was once there, whether it be old bar stools or I don't know. I mean, anything cool like that?
No, unfortunately. It was divided, interestingly, upstairs. The only thing between my bedroom and the neighbor's bedroom is doors that have been like nailed shut, and I have a door that goes to nothing that has like an insulation board behind it. So there was obviously a connection at one time.
Okay, I got you. I also, I almost forgot to mention our next program. We can still keep talking and do question and answers, but the next program I'm going to be hosting for those that might be interested is Trolley History of Lititz, July 12th at 7 p.m. If you're interested in signing up, send me an email. There's also an event page created on our Facebook, and we've had about maybe 10 or 12 sign up for that already. It works the same way. Make a donation in any amount. It could be $1, it could be 10, it could be 20, whatever. If you enjoyed this program here tonight on Taverns, hopefully you'll like the one on Trolley History. So, and then I plan to do one in August and September again. So just a little plug there, but yeah, let's keep going with the questions and answers.
Awesome presentation, Corey. Loved
Thanks.
it. Had a quick question. It
Yeah.
seemed as though I was hearing a similar story about the post office changing names. I'm sure this could probably be its own presentation, but it seemed as though the post office seemed to decide the names for some of these towns.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that happened in Burnerville, that happened in Pine Hill, that happened in Kissel Hill. So yeah, absolutely it did. Once the government got involved, sometimes they would even, uh, tell people what they can and can't do. And they were ultimately the ones that changed the name. In fact, if you remember, Lititz went from one T to two T's because of the U.S. Post Office in 1880. Any other questions?
Corey,
Yes.
have you ever checked with the curatorial department at Landis Valley? I know they have a number of tavern signs from
Yes.
the Lititz area.
Yes, thanks for bringing it up, Rick. In fact, in 2011, actually 2010, the book came out in 2011. When I released my book on Warwick Township history, I went to them. I think it was Bruce Bomberger at the time was there, and he gave me some photos, early photos of the Kissel Hill Hotel and the Burnerville Hotel. And I think most of the photos that you saw in tonight's program of the old iron tavern signs, they're actually from Landis Valley.
Okay,
I don't know.
you.
They might have others. Yep. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the Lititz Historical Foundation. I hope you learned something tonight. And again, if you are interested, July 12th, 7 p.m., I'm going to be doing a program on the history of trolleys in Lititz. So best way to sign up, go onto our event page. There's a link to donate. If you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. And I just want to thank you all again for attending. And hopefully we'll see many of you in July. All right. Good night. Thank you.